Alrighty, great games in the evening. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is Game Master's Soapbox. Today we're going to talk about the many faces of role playing. Dramatic entrance here. Now, role playing as a genre is as old as humanity. We have been playing role play games all of our lives in every generation since the very beginning. Role playing is a element of all of our educations. All of us have done it in trainings. All of us have done it in parts of our lives that are very serious, and we've done them in the most silly, crazy times of our lives as possible. Today, we're going to be talking about the various forms of role playing, and hence the name Many Faces. We are going to talk a little bit about LARPs, about tabletop games, about miniatures board gaming, virtual tabletops, and theater of mind. Some of these are terms you may have heard of before. Some of them you've probably experienced, and I don't want to leave any of them out in case there's a way of role play. I'm also going to put in the all sizes fit all, or fits all sizes. One size fits all. That's what I was trying for. Alrighty, so when we say many faces of role playing, let's start with the basic. When we are children, when we were children, some of us still are, I jokingly say. When we are children, we play role playing games all the time. We play role play nonstop. Pretend I'm this, pretend I'm that, pretend I'm someone else, pretend I'm my brother. Sometimes I pretend I'm a human being. But the idea of make believe in improvisation takes all forms and at all types. So maybe when we think of role play, we have to define the term a little bit more clearer. So role play, you're playing a role. Well, gosh, a role can be any characteristic or group of characteristics that define a person. So if we are role playing ourselves, we are acting like normal. But the basis for role play is emulation and replication. We are trying to learn what we're supposed to do, try to find our way in the world. So the imagination, being what it is, allows us to convey a different, in certain circumstances, in any situation we're in, depending on what is necessary. In psychology, they talk about the mask theory, the idea that our personality is itself simply a role that we have defined for ourselves and that we play within, and that people with things like multiple personality disorder are fundamentally shifting from one mask to another, seemingly out of control because they let the triggers last too long and they stay in a role long enough for them to define it as a separate personality. And the reality is that we all shift masks. As a matter of fact, the study, and I don't have the book right here in front of me. I'll have to look it up and put the note up here above. But there was a book that was written about psychology where they actually studied personnel leaving and going from the different stages in a restaurant. The personality that they had once they crossed the threshold into the kitchen and were no longer in sight of their clientele shifted, and that they changed personalities, they changed demeanors, and even their actions shifted as they crossed that threshold back into the work environment. And that shifting capability is something that we as human beings adapt to all the time. And so role play is the mechanism we have always used to learn this mechanism that we have to use in our lives in every facet. So let's talk about the various forms of them, shall we? Live action role play, LARP, is the perhaps the most obvious and yet the one that is perhaps most chided compared to any of the others for role playing environments. Live action role play is where you actually act out physically those things that you would do in that role. And generally, live action role play will be set in a particular genre, and so the personality will fit a trope, a collection of tropes that are accepted within that live action role play. So maybe it's set in a fantasy setting, in which case you play the standard, considered standard role playing character personas. But you could also be in a 1920s gangster story. You might be in a modern dystopia. You might be in a futuristic post apocalypse. The live action aspect of it is that you're actually physically doing actions, not just speaking the words and describing your activities. Tabletop role play games, on the other hand, sound are exactly what they sound like. You're sitting at a table, and all the playing pieces of the game, if you will, are on the table. There will be dice that determine solutions. There will be miniatures to represent the people. There'll be terrain features set up or whatever. And the tabletop becomes the world, and you role play the persona that's in that adventure. In like fashion, a miniatures war game that does the same thing, but in the case of a miniatures war game, the role play aspect is somewhat downplayed. You are playing in a way of carrying forward the story, but you're using the miniatures, the distances that are moved as pieces move across the board, the physical distance between models determine ranging for weapons and the like, and therefore the miniatures wargaming is more statistics based rather than not a rather than a specific uh, role play environment. So as you deal with the mechanics of that, then you move to the next level, if you will, of the encounter, and you're playing the actual role play of it. And so the elevation above the table is determined uh, before you play, whether you're playing a miniatures game or whether you're playing a role play game. Virtual tabletop is very similar to standard tabletop role playing game, but it uses virtual tables. So, for example, you've seen this before in there's an environment called Roll20, or there's dozens of different means of putting up a visual representation of what's going on in the game, and then the players interact just like in a tabletop game, but in reference to those virtual pieces on the virtual board. And then, in my personal favorite, the way I generally run my role play games is in the theater of the mind. And that is the storyteller creates an environment, describes it to the detail where the players can perceive of it and interact with it and make interchange as if they were in that same imaginary space. And theater of the mind role play is by far the more visceral. It's more you feel it than you see it, because you're given descriptions and you're having to create in your own imagination that same space and playing in that same environment in such a fashion. So, with that awareness, therefore, the theater of the mind is by far more dynamic, and while it isn't as visual, it is more intense in terms of the emotional state and the characteristics of the players. Now, I said I would be on here for 20 minutes for an hour, and I finished getting through the materials I wanted to get through in once again a record time, and it's still 8 minutes long. So this will be a video that will go up onto YouTube. But just realize when we talk about the many facets of role playing, we're talking about the same thing spread across different genres and to different degrees. The make believe that we did when we were children. Let's play cops and robbers. Let's play space aliens. Play astronauts on the moon. That role play that we did then is exactly the same as modern theater of the mind and maybe even live action play, except that we are utilizing a mechanism that gives us rules and numeric values that as adult minds we can comprehend more than the mere imaginative nature of our youth. So in every format, you're experiencing the same thing in different levels of intensity and realism. And by knowing the various types, you can perceive of what level of activity is proper for that game table. I want to thank you for the time for watching this episode, and we will see you at a later time. I anticipated possibly being online later, but really not a need. I got to the material I wanted to relatively quickly tonight. And we will be back on tomorrow, same time, 11 p.m., with another episode of Game Master Soapbox at additional Additionally, we will be on at 9 o'clock p.m. tomorrow with another episode of the Session Zero Chronicles, where we will go over more of the details of the Nikos RPG. And in between then and now, I'll probably be putting up one or two more videos. So, but basically, watch my channel for more information. If you like what you're seeing, make sure you click do the appropriate button pressing down below, so that so that so you know when the next videos will air. One of these days, I'll get this whole terminology down, and it'll be much more simple. Until then, stick with me, and I'll see you next time. And remember that real life is for those people